program, and also those who are watching in the live stream. I want to introduce to you our moderator today. Where'd Bob go? Bob Oldham. I will say this, we usually, at least to some degree, partner with the Public Affairs Office, which is where Bob works, but much so on this one. This has been pretty much an equal partnership for this program. The other thing is that about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, I was coming back from the PX, getting my morning drink, and Bob said, hey, what are we doing for the 20th anniversary of Katrina? Wow, it is 20 years. Okay, it goes by quick. So we got together, panel discussion is what we decided to do. I think it's the best thing, and we got a great panel today, and I'm going to turn this over now to Bob.
Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, please take a moment to ensure your electronic devices are turned to silent. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us in person or online for today's panel discussion about Hurricane Katrina 2 decades later. I'm Bob Oldham, an Arkansas National Guard Public Affairs Specialist and your moderator for today's discussion. Our panelists today on the far end are Colonel Joe Lynch, retired Colonel Don Concrack, retired Colonel Paul Harrell, retired Lieutenant Colonel Ross Brashears, and Chief Master Sergeant Jonathan Hunter. Before we get to them, though, we need to quickly set the scene to help provide context and paint the backdrop for their comments. For context, the 39th Infantry Brigade Combat Team, the state's largest military unit, had just returned home in April 2005 from a year-long deployment to Iraq, where it conducted patrols in and around Baghdad and were routinely attacked by insurgent-placed improvised explosive devices, rocket-propelled grenades, and small arms fire. Before the storm made landfall on August 29, 2005, the Arkansas National Guard began its association with the Katrina disaster by opening its armories in the state to provide shelter for incoming evacuees. On September 1, 2005, in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, elements of the 39th Infantry Brigade Combat Team deployed to New Orleans via Arkansas National Guard C-130s from Little Rock Air Force Base to support the relief effort and recovery efforts as part of Operation Katrina. Other elements convoyed down to the greater New Orleans area. Under tactical control of the Louisiana National Guard, the 39th soldiers were given the mission of providing security and food and water to an estimated 20,000 people at the New Orleans Convention Center on the 2nd of September. By the afternoon of the 3rd of September, all individuals staying in and around the convention center had been evacuated. The mission of the 39th in Louisiana grew to the point that at one time the brigade was responsible for working with local officials in 14 parishes. The 39th Brigade headquarters was eventually relieved by the 142nd Field Artillery Brigade headquarters, and elements of the Arkansas National Guard remained deployed in Louisiana until February 2006. The Arkansas ARNG National Guard mobilized more than 1,800 troops to aid relief efforts in New Orleans, providing rescue, logistical support, and assistance with various operations. More were utilized at Fort Chaffee for the bed down of evacuees. Arkansas sent more than 400 soldiers from the 3rd of the 53rd Infantry and 1st of the 42nd Field Artillery to Louisiana. Soldiers from the 3rd of the 53rd arrived early enough to help evacuate the Superdome and Convention Center. With that mission complete, the 3rd of the 153rd Infantry moved to Kenner, Louisiana, where it joined the rest of the Arkansas Task Force. The Arkansas Task Force conducted search and rescue operations and distributed aid to the residents of Jefferson Parish. Members of the Arkansas Air National Guard's 123rd Intelligence Squadron were deployed to Ellington Field near Houston, Texas to support RC-26B Metroliner missions. The aircraft would obtain aerial imagery on film that would need to be developed and turned into prints for analysis. The 123rd developed more than 1,300 images, which was 67% of all imagery used in hurricane relief operations. RC-26B aircraft were photographing levees for FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers. 2 U-860 Black Hawk medical evacuation helicopters from the 77th Theater Aviation Brigade flew to Mississippi the day after Hurricane Katrina struck to help with search and rescue operations there. They were supported by airmen from the Arkansas Air National Guard's 154th Weather Flight. Additionally, Task Force Razorback, a 350-person force made up of engineers from the Arkansas Army National Guard's 875th Engineer Company, 216th Military Police Company, and medical support and transportation personnel left for Camp Shelby, Mississippi on Tuesday, 30 August, Task Force Razorback operated in Waveland, Mississippi, a town heavily damaged by Hurricane Katrina. Finally, Fort Chaffee near Fort Smith is where 10,000 evacuees arrived by bus on September 4th. They've been picked up at the Louisiana Superdome, the Ernest N. Morial Convention Center, and other points in Mississippi and Texas. Fort Chaffee was set up as an intake center to help the evacuees with the paperwork for any disaster-related assistance they might need, such applications for Social Security and food stamps, and change of address forms. After checking in, the evacuees were offered a hot meal and places to sleep in the shower. They were free to leave if they had the means or the contacts to be able to do so. Some moved on to church camps or other kind of shelters operated by non-governmental operations. It really was a comprehensive effort to help our neighbors in the South, in Louisiana and Mississippi, in their time of need. We certainly didn't do it alone. Many other states' National Guard units helped too. And the Arkansas National Guard plugged in where Louisiana officials needed us to be of assistance to help their citizens. This is what the National Guard is uniquely qualified to do: step in and provide a wide range of support to civil authorities in a disaster. Understanding that wave-top overview, let's hear from our panelists and their experiences. We'll start with Colonel Lynch.
Before you get started there, it's significant to note that Arkansas was the first state to provide support, and we were the last state to pull out.
Thank you, sir. That's General Morrill, who was the Adjutant General during that time, and thank you for visiting us when we were down there. Hey, everybody, I'm Joel Lynch, the Public Affairs Officer for the Arkansas National Guard. At the time, in 2005, I was the S2 for the 3rd Battalion, 153rd Infantry, and as I understood it, that the state during that really initial response was we pulled 100 people roughly from each battalion, 3 battalions from the 39th, that is 3 maneuver battalions, and we would have a headquarters that came from 3rd Battalion, of which I was a part of, and I was on that staff. So Colonel Mark Lumpkin, Slade McPherson, Chad Higginbotham, and several others, and myself, were the headquarters element of that 300 people that we pulled together in a really short amount of time to go down to New Orleans. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the first few days, and I could keep going on and on because there's just so much stuff that happened down there. But so my initial piece of this as the S2 is the intelligence officer, which my job is really kind of like help the commander see the battlefield or the operational area and kind of understand what we're getting into. Well, at the time, I'm a M-Day or a part-time soldier. I work in Shreveport, Louisiana, at a television station, and my wife and I were getting ready to go visit family in Texas. We were like literally loading our truck up, and I get the phone call. It's like 10 o'clock or so in the morning on, we think it's I think that Tuesday of that week, and it's Slade McPherson saying, "Hey Joel, we're going to New Orleans. How soon can you be here?" And now here, for that moment, was in Warren, Arkansas, which is about a 3-hour drive from Shreveport. So sure, I grab my stuff, load up my rucksack, and hit the road. And because we see this as coming, we're all watching the news, and we already kind of knew that we had a warning order that we may be going down there. So yeah, not a huge surprise, but certainly messed up my Labor Day plans. So I get in the car, head towards Warren. Like I said, about a 3-hour drive. Along the way, I stopped at the Walmarts on the way up, because one of the things the S2 does, the intel guy does, he's the map guy, right? If you need a map of the place, you always ask the S2. So I hit Walmart in Homer, Louisiana, and I think in El Dorado, and bought up all their atlases on the way up there. Just pulled out the credit card and just did it, hoping that it would work out later on. But anyhow, so I grabbed as many maps because I figured they'd be kind of handy. It turned out they were, and I go up to Warren, and we just really kind of start working the plan to get all these M-Day soldiers together, get them to Little Rock to get on the C-130s, because we flew in. There was a ground convoy, but our particular piece of the task force, we actually loaded C-130s on, I believe it was on that Wednesday or Thursday, and flew into Louisiana, the Belle Chase Naval Air Station, and that was just a madhouse, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of activity, a lot of effort going to help the citizens in New Orleans. And we were just going to go down and figure it out along the way. And I kind of Colonel Concrete and his team back here at Camp Robinson were kind of figuring out what we were going to do when we get there. Our job was just to kind of get there. So we've got all our stuff on, we've got our gear, we've got weapons, we've got our rucksacks, and we go to Belle Chase. And really it was kind of chaos for a while, as you can imagine. But I did a little research, and pulled down a calendar from 2005, thank goodness for the internet. And kind of started looking at the metadata on the photos I took to kind of figure out when things were happening. And it looks like really on the 1st, that's when we actually got into at Bell Chase. And up and down all night long as we kind of repositioned to kind of figure out what was going on. But what we ended up doing on Friday was actually get in a bus and went into New Orleans. Bell Chase is the Naval Air Station. I think it's in the southeast part of the city. So we're on buses. We go into the city and we drive down to a parking garage. We're gathering information along the way. Colonel Lumpkin and the staff, kind of, and Colonel Major DeComfy at the time, we're working out the plan on what did we need to do. Our job, was we found out, was to go secure the Memorial Convention Center. So as you know, the Superdome was the designated place for people to go shelter for the hurricane. The convention center was never designed to be, but thousands of people were there. They were stranded. There was no way to get out. And our job was to go secure the area, because if you recall from the news, it was riddled with gangs or people getting killed, and it was just awful. And there was a lot of that was true, but not as bad as the media kind of made it out to be. But our job was to go there, secure the area so that the humanitarian assistance can kind of happen and we can start evacuating people. So we get into New Orleans on Friday, really do some hasty planning in the parking garage. We go down and get on a convoy of LMTVs that are about 10 or 15 blocks away from the convention center. And everybody's still kind of worried because we think it's just run by gangs down there. And in fact, the driver of the LMTV is a cargo truck. And that was a unit from the Louisiana National Guard. Their drivers didn't want to go. And they actually abandoned the LMTV that my unit was going to get in. And so me and the Staff Sergeant Jackie Sanders was in our unit. And he could drive, so okay, let's take it once he's get. So we called the police to the convention center, taking that trip down and not know what to get into. And at the time, helmets, we've got all our combat gear on, we've got weapons, we've got ammunition. I don't remember the Army status, but I'm pretty sure it was honest in the weapon probably. But anyhow, we're going down there not knowing what we're going to get into. So we head down, I think the street was Chapatulas. If you've ever been to New Orleans, their street names are a challenge. And that didn't help us out much. So we round the corner, we see the convention center, see thousands of people out in the streets, no police, because the police had been kind of run out of there. The citizens were not happy with the New Orleans response. We were the cavalry, literally getting there. And when we pulled up to the convention center, we basically see the people, me and Jackie, we get out of the LMTV because we're the first ones. It just kind of, I had to move some people so we could get into a parking lot. But not sure what the greeting was going to be, but it turned out to be, they were just really happy to see us. They knew relief was there. We got out of the trucks, our soldiers get out. We quickly realized it's not as a dangerous situation for us as it would have been for probably the local 1 or 2 police that were out there. And that was a big thing. People saw the National Guard as the people who were here to help. We were there that day, and we just really started securing the area, moving vehicles out of the way so that the relief convoys could get there with water and food, and start prepping the things that were going to eventually get these people on buses the next day. But anyhow, as things kind of calmed down, we took off our helmets, put our soft caps on, and just started being normal and helping people. And we always had our weapon on us because you just don't leave that laying around. But we really brought our posture down to a more friendly, we're here to help posture, and just started helping people. And I'll kind of end it there because so we could go on and on. But there was just so many people who were really hurting. People were, toilets weren't working, there wasn't water, there wasn't food. It was hot, no air conditioning was working. I mean, it's August in New Orleans, humid, and just people were suffering. They needed any help they could get. They saw us as being that. So we were really happy to do that. But that really just marked the beginning of my 30 days in New Orleans, and for what the task force would be eventually, like 6 months, I think. So, yeah, that's my initial piece, and glad I did it. So.
Colonel Comcott?
Thank you. That's a really interesting story. I'm pretty sure that I processed that bill before I left the conference to get you paid for those maps, but I don't know that for sure. First off, let me apologize. I'm very nervous right now. I was thinking about what do you do, and I can't give you any of the great grand stories like Youngest did and other fine folks can, because they were doing things on the ground. I was down at the job. I never saw daylight for days, because we just lived down there. Everything I did was telephones and radios and answering questions and going up on the hill and doing status reports. The guys downrange were the guys who were making this response work. But we had some challenges here, and I'm thinking about a couple of stories, and I'm just going to tell you a couple of stories that kind of happened. One of the things that we determined early on is that the ability to logistically support the soldiers and airmen that we sent down range was going to be a real challenge. There was no support base for them. It had to come from here. So John Bracken, who was the director of ATOM at the time, called me up and he said, you know, we were having a little phone conversation about how do you think you're going to do it. John was formerly an Arkansas Guardsman, is now the director of ATOM. And I said, well, the only way I believe we can do it is by air. And the convoys, the reports back from the convoys were just that roads were jammed, debris was everywhere, the engineers are trying to clear it, but that doesn't get a truck down to the soldiers that need it. So what John Bracken did said, mobilize the airlift wing of the Air National Guard, about an 1,800-man unit with about, I think, 8 airplanes, I believe is what they had. They had a federal flying mission, and Bracken said, it's too bad. I called TAG, said, here's the deal. Called the unit, put them on state active duty, and told them to cease flying for the federal government. You're now flying for the governor of Arkansas. We put the initial, we put 3 C-130s heading down to Belle Chase. I don't remember the day. It's not on your list, so you can't help me. And I actually had some air guard, and I can't remember the big, tall lieutenant colonel pilot. What's his name?
John Judy.
I believe that sounds like. Anyway, he was in there, and we launched the aircraft, and this John, I guess, Lieutenant Colonel, came up to me and said, so we don't have a PPR. And not being very familiar with Air Force operations, I had no idea what a PPR was. I said, okay, well, go anyway. And he said, well, I can't. There's no, the Naval Air Station had removed its personnel and had moved to, and I knew that, and that's why the first aircraft had an air traffic control unit on it, because we were going to be doing air ops, and somebody has to keep airplanes from bumping into each other. And so he called Dallas, Texas, and said, he talked to a guy for a while, and he put me on the phone, and I said, I don't know why I'm on the phone. Did you give him the PPR? And he said, you're not getting a PPR. And I said, what the hell is a PPR? And he said, well, it's your permission to land. I said, oh, we're landing. That doesn't make any difference. You know, because there's no air traffic control down there, and the first unit, the first thing on the first airplane is air traffic control. You guys left. Give me my PPR. Still don't know what it means. But that's the kind of stuff that happens. So it was a story. There's a lot of them. it ended up being the motivating factor for the state of Arkansas to stick a lot of money and help build the current job. The original building probably would, you put two of them in this room, and now it's, I have no idea how many square feet it is, but it's a large operations center because we discovered that the Arkansas Guard was going to be doing some large things and needed some, so that was helpful. I had another story, but I can't remember. So what I'm going to do is just say that the stories you hear from downrange are heartwarming, and I just want to say that I was proud to have been part of the support staff that got these guys down there for them to do what they did. So if you have a question, I believe we're going to do questions and answers. So I'm going to pass the microphone, and then if you have a question, I'll be up here until it's time for lunch.
So Colonel Cronkite does not give himself credit. If you understand what it means to be the Director of Military Support and the J3, yes, that's a staff function, but he's not kidding. He didn't see daylight for days. Our Joint Operations Center that does the command and control for all that we did for Katrina, he led that. And at least had the grace, as he just alluded to understand that there were parts of the Arkansas National Guard, the area in particular, he didn't understand. And so my early role in the Katrina response was to be one of the airmen that went out to that Joint Operations Center, potentially my second time on Camp Robinson in my entire career, and learn a little bit about what they were doing. And it's incredible if you can think about the entire force structure of Arkansas that we sent down there, coordinating with the National Guard Bureau, coordinating with the FEMA elements, coordinating with the Louisiana National Guard, and all that was being done by a team of great soldiers and airmen, but this man was leading that. So, sir, thank you. I'm now Colonel Bell's measure of the time, and I was scared to death of this man for about... So it's good to see you, sir. So I'm a bit of a fraud in this panel, I feel like, because I was, like I said, in the JOC, but I can talk a little bit about what the air did. And I did actually get an opportunity to go down in December. And just to set the scene a little bit like Bob did at the beginning, when I went down in December, which is a couple months later, in my POV, I didn't get to Louisiana until it was dark. And it was still dark. No street lights. No city lights, no lights on anywhere. It was like those post-apocalyptic movies that you've seen. In December was still what New Orleans looks like. So imagine what Joe was experiencing. Imagine what those first convoys were seeing. They were getting that same sort of dark, mysterious, this doesn't look like an American city that I've ever seen before. And the devastation and the debris on the roads and the water and the standing water and all that kind of stuff. So just a huge shout out to those airmen and soldiers that did go down in that first wave. Because although, from my perspective, my December deployment to Katrina was a hardship, there was nothing like what those first folks went through. But as was alluded to by Colonel Cronkite, the airmen did have some of the aircraft also, but they had some ground capability. We don't have the number of personnel that the 39th and 142nd can throw at a problem like that, but we have some very capable airmen. So the Civil Engineer Squadron in particular that I commanded at the time, and our logistics and our security forces squadrons. Obviously, the security element was important, so our cops, our security forces airmen had that skill set inherent. Our logistics readiness folks maintained deployment bags for us, so the ability to get a hold of sleeping bags and tents and weapons for our folks and all those kind of things. They were experts at doing that. And then our civil engineers had the ability to think about how do we get generators going. And in fact, one of the great stories I heard from one of my own was getting on the way down there and not exactly knowing where they wanted to get to. We were kicked off of Belle Chase. There just wasn't room. And so they said, find somewhere. And so an entire convoy found a school, and two enterprising airmen figured out how to cobble together a generator, turn on the lights, and at least create some semblance of comfort for those folks going down on that first deployment. So yeah, I'm happy to talk more, but I wanna make sure our other panelists have some time and just, again, give a good shout out to all the folks that are up here. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. So I'm Ross Shears. My contribution to Hurricane Katrina consisted of working at Fort Chaffee. 2005, I'm a young, motivated captain in an artillery battalion immediately adjacent to Fort Chaffee, and I was really excited to get the opportunity to go down to New Orleans. However, my superiors didn't think that was the place for me to go, so helping a road convoy get out the gate, I then mobilized to support Fort Chaffee to receive evacuees from the New Orleans area. Got to spend a couple of weeks working at Fort Chaffee, receiving, processing, sustaining approximately 9,000 evacuees in Fort Chaffee. So they would fly in through Evan, I believe, and then bus over to Chaffee. Other government agencies, charitable organizations, the Fort Chaffee staff, and then additional augmentees like myself and other soldiers from the 142nd, 39th, and I believe even Troop Command would provide commodity distribution, some transportation, and generally just solve problems for the evacuees. When the evacuees got off the buses, they were hot, tired, frustrated. As you might imagine, these are some of the most vulnerable people out there in society. And the Arkansas Guard, in addition to everyone else that was, including state and local government, had the opportunity to provide some comfort to the evacuees and to move them on to more comfortable living situations, be it in a church camp or wherever they moved on to that was a little bit more comfortable than Fort Chaffee.
My name is Jonathan Hunter, currently the 189th Air Marine Command Chief, but if you rewind 20 years ago, I was in the E4, as y'all call it, invader. That was, they sent a request that said, hey, do you want to get on 31 days of orders? And I said, sure. And it's interesting, all the connections that I'm hearing from Colonel Lynch, all the colonels here on the board, from my perspective, I was just saying, hey, I'm going to go down there and be boots on the ground and get out there. So I remember coming down to camp, and it's interesting because I'm Air Force, and Colonel Lynch was talking about flying folks down, but I got on a convoy and I drove a Humvee down. So it was my first time ever, first off, staying in the barracks here overnight, getting in a Humvee, I had to drive by myself, because everyone else was paired up, and I had to drive by myself. And we ended up going, I think it was like 10 hours just to Baton Rouge. It's so rough on that thing, man. It really beat me up, but it was a great opportunity at that time. I was so naive. I had no clue what I was getting into, and I was in receive mode of all the orders that were going to be given to me, and I did my 31 days. And someone had talked to me earlier about what did that look like? And I said, what was your day-to-day operations down there? And I said, no day was the same. You talked about the school, and that's where I stayed. So I remember going door to door, kind of downtown, helping move the vehicles, and that's one of the most devastating parts of my early career. It was the first time I seen a deceased person. The smell hit me before I saw it. And then the other day-to-day operations were staying close at the Red Cross, where they had the Red Cross in a parking lot. They just dropped supplies there, and they had us armed, right? And it was the same experience as you talk about. Of course I'm scared. I'm like, am I have an ROE card? Am I supposed to actually shoot somebody if they come up here
trying to get supplies, but it was the same experience as you talked about. We just wanted to come up the day, let's see the person in uniform, and they were like, man, that's somebody helping us. And we just had conversation with them and said, all right, we can't do these things until the morning time, so come back first thing, and we'll be distributing all these supplies out to you. And there was a lot of experience that I had as well. Last day operations, I really got my hands in, and I felt like a soldier at that time because we were filling up sandbags, hooking them up to Chinook, the real flying, and reinforcing the levees. So there was some of my day-to-day operations down there. One of the most impactful pieces of my career that helped me stay in the Arkansas National Guard up until this day. Because before that, I was just going to school, I would come out there and do some drills, and at that time I was a aircraft maintainer, I was working on an aircraft, but then I got an opportunity to go and see, I had no clue what an EMAC was, what a Defense Support Procedure Authority was, I didn't know any of that stuff, I just wanted to go and help. And then seeing the impact that we have on the humanitarian side as a citizen soldiers and citizen airmen is something that shaped my career up until this point. So fantastic time, and I was appreciative of being able to come and speak to you all today. So, with that said, does anybody in the audience have any questions for the panelists?
Just had a little bit of what Ross was talking about, this little chatty piece about just how many, just making people comfortable and trying to get people back on their feet in some way or whatever. When we were putting people on buses, this happened on the Saturday, like the day we got to the convention center and kind of stabilized that with a Friday. The next day we put people on buses at like 9 o'clock in the morning. So there were just hundreds of commercial buses, some school buses, they just were lined up. And people were in various parts of near the Riverwalk area, and we just kind of queued them up and pushed them to buses. Those people had whatever they had. I became a pet lover. I understood pet lover at this point because some buses wouldn't let somebody on with a dog. That person wasn't going to leave, so they waited for a bus that would allow them to. Also, I understood the importance of having a firearm. At some point, the government will not be there to protect you, so there were guys who had weapons, and we had to kind of deal with that. They weren't harmful or threatening, but still, there was people who were there to protect themselves, so we had to kind of deal with that. But what I really kind of want to make was, we lined people up, put them on buses, and they didn't know where they were going. Well, we didn't know where they were going, so we couldn't even tell them. So they loaded up a bus, for the most part, as many people as they could get on there. Some buses, and these bus convoys, they would go to Houston, some of them went to Kentucky, some of them went to Utah, and they had no idea until they probably got their bus of full Chaffee that you were there to help them out. And they started a whole new life, whether it was there or in Shreveport or Houston, and they never went back home. And so that was just really how fate just kind of, will pop up in your life and just determine where you're going to go. But you're just operating on faith that your government's going to take care of you. And at some point it won't, but when it gets on its feet, it's coming to you, and you're going to take care of them. And it happened. So that was an interesting thing that we didn't have any visibility of, and seeing later on the stories and the photographs of what happened at Fort Chaffee, that was kind of a huge deal. So thanks to you for making that happen.
I remember flying into Louisiana and taking some pictures and talking to one of the loadmasters, and somebody had their dog with them on the aircraft. I got back to Little Rock and published a picture, and I was talking to the loadmaster the next day, and I go, I didn't know you guys could haul pets. He goes, we can't. They're supposed to be in a container, right? In a crate carrier. So we can't. I said, then how'd you do it? He said, we just did it. And I go, why? He goes, that's the only thing that person had left was their pet, and I'm not separating them from their pet. And they put them on a plane and flew them. We'll figure out the paperwork later. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? We've got some questions for the panel. General Henderson.
Okay. I guess all I can say is I was just trying to push anything we had that was available to go down range that could do anything to help anybody. I had no idea. what I was sending them into. I mean, there was no intel. The annexation is just like any other military support operation. You know, you start thinking about what are the civilians going to need, so you try to send. But in this one, it was a little bigger, obviously, because we weren't just sending troops, we weren't just sending vehicles, because we also had to. Nobody could feed them. We had to feed them. You know, nobody could give them bullets. We had to give them bullets. Nobody could give them medical care. We had to get medical care to them. So it was just looking at it. I guess the best way I can frame it is just trying to figure out what it takes to run a small city and figure out how to put it on airplanes and put it on the back of trucks and get it done. Hope that answers your question. Sir.
You know, having worked in emergency management a lot since Katrina, we have force packages that are designed to do specific things. And if you were to talk to FEMA or our own Arkansas Emergency Management, and certainly our great soldiers and airmen that are now running the DOMs, they've already thought through and learned what force packages. But, you know, he talked about route clearance before. We didn't know that that might mean a couple of Bubbas with a chainsaw. We didn't know that that might mean a skid steer might be a good idea. He's right. We're kind of guessing what right would look like. What are the soldiers and airmen going to see? What are we hearing from those first echelons that were going down there? One example I remember in trying to fill a requirement that just, you know, you're looking at the job desk and here comes a requirement that says we need 500 Tyvek suits. Who would have thought they needed 500 Tyvek suits? Well, apparently the floodwater, when it comes up, grabs all the engine oil out of the cars, it grabs all the sewage out of the sewers, it grabs all the chemicals that you don't think are on that asphalt, and it just kind of churns it all up. And our soldiers are wading through that, trying to do house checks, and they're getting blisters on their legs because that water is contaminating them. That wasn't something any of us could have foreseen as we were thinking about what should we put in those trucks as they're going down. And so we're flying Tyvek suits down that we're going to Home Depot to buy because we don't have level A gear that they really should have been wearing. So that's what we were doing in the JOC, is trying to figure out how are we getting the right equipment now that we couldn't have possibly conceived that they would need. Later, and in those first 24 hours, it was going through this what-if drill in your mind of what our soldiers and airmen are going to need to be able to do what they need to when they get down there, not knowing that there's no power, there's nowhere to bed down, there's nothing to eat, and all those kind of things. So I think we did a great job in the first 24 hours, but it was by no means perfect.
Any other questions?
Yes, Carl's question was how have we learned from that and what have we done in our own plans? And I'll put it back to Louisiana a little bit. As you can imagine, being ground zero for that event, the Louisiana National Guard afterwards says that's not going to happen again, and they created an all-hazards conference that they still hold to this day down in Louisiana, where they invite all the force providers that helped them in Katrina to come think through, if we had another Katrina, what would you bring? How many Tyvek suits would you bring? Those kind of questions at a lot more sophisticated level. So at the early days of the all-hazard conference, Louisiana would theorize about all the things that they would need to do the mission sets that we then learned needed to be done. How do you reestablish power? How do you project security? How do you decontaminate? How do you determine whether an area is contaminated in the first place? Our civil support teams are great at those kind of things. And so we would all get together, Arkansas, Tennessee, etc., Texas, and go to Louisiana and ask them what they thought their requirements would be the next time they had that. And then as that process evolved, we were able to refine those requirements so that it wasn't just, we'll send you a brigade. It was what pieces of that brigade do you need to do the things you need? What pieces of the airlift wing do you need to be able to do that? And actually it evolved to the point where we also say, hey, if we had the worst day in Arkansas, Louisiana, what would you bring to us? So it has become a two-way dialogue instead of a one-way requirements thing. But I would argue we are way more ready for a Katrina type event by a long shot than we certainly were when that happened.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Going back a little bit from the photos I took and my lousy found out my green book, from Katrina, and actually from the 18 before, which surprisingly not much happened. But and try to put together a little bit. So I got the call. Actually, a weekend prior to 27-28, we actually had a training management workshop. We had a team building in Hot Spring. That's the third day I did. So we already kind of talked a little bit about it. We thought it might be coming, so just kind of put it in the back of your head. But we actually got the phone call. He said, I personally got a phone call on Tuesday the 30th. So in uniform in Warren, Arkansas that afternoon with my box of maps, all that. That was one. So I was in the game within a couple hours of me getting a phone call. I was boots on the ground on Thursday the 1st. So it's basically you had a day after my phone call for us to kind of get together, figure out our task force, for a compact to figure out our aircraft situation, flying down there, and I believe it was Thursday morning, or Thursday afternoon we landed down, and it's actually in New Orleans. And then from there, about another 24 hours, where we were actually helping citizens, get better. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. And also, we do that all the time. I say not on that scale, but every year whether it's a winter response, a tornado response, some notice event happens, we can put soldiers, and we're not a 911 force, civilian authorities, we're always the first people on the scene, but we're not far behind because we kind of lean forward a little bit. We'll have soldiers that are ready, we'll have our phone rosters that we've checked, and so we're postured to respond pretty quick after an event happens, and so when the governor does say go, we're there pretty quick. So,
If you're painting your house, it's those white paint-proof suits that you get at Home Depot. It is not the right solution to the problem. The right solution is a level A, full-body suit with an air filter that's literally a barrier between you and the water, but we didn't have those, not in the quantities that we did. So it's something you buy at Home Depot to paint your house or work on a car. It's not the right solution, but it was all we could think of at the time. The question was, what's a Tyvek suit? Sorry.
Yes, Major Lopez.
My question for those who were boots on the ground is, can you recall the experience working with other guardsmen from other units, and did you feel that as the National Guard would be working jointly, or were there any guards that you have to work?
You remember I was 21 years old, so I remember working with some guardsmen, Army Guard, and I also remember working with some active duty Air Force. I think they were dropping, 314th actually was flying in and dropping off supplies. How we worked together at that time, I think to caveat my perspective was, I was just said, okay, we're going to be in this group of people, and it was a mixture, and we definitely worked together. And I think it just goes into the point of working jointly, especially in times of humanitarian services, it always brings out the best in us. So I'd say that absolutely we were able to work jointly, especially from my perspective.
So one of my jobs every day, I work with the police department. Actually, I know the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office very well. In fact, I got the badge from I work with every day. I'm really proud of that. But the military side of it, actually, Katrina was, everybody wanted to help. And states from all over the place, but they would send units down, and there's always what's the duty status they're going to be, and how we're going to pay them, what have you. So they would be convoying from the East Coast. I think I ran into somebody from New Hampshire or something, but there was no really fit area because as they were kind of developed the operational area, like, who's going to be responsible for whatever. Because we in the military, we kind of like to know that this square block is mine. I am in charge of this. It was a very fluid city, and as I would go to these meetings twice a day at the sheriff's office, I'd run into units one afternoon that wasn't there in the morning. And so one of the things we did, we just go up to them and we just say, hey, who are you? Where are you from? What are you doing? Where are you at? And they'd be in a park somewhere, they'd be in a school, they just squat down somewhere in some space that they could park their convoy. And they'd only be there for a couple of 3 days because a lot of them were down there in annual training status. So for the guard guys, that's 2 weeks, your clock's ticking whenever you're there. And so they spend 3 days on the road to get there. They'd be there for 4 or 5 days, try to help out, and then they'd be gone the next morning. And so there wasn't, I think there was an attempt to kind of control that. It is way above my level, but at the very least, we were seeking out those other units so that we weren't stepping on each other, but we also weren't duplicating efforts so we didn't have to. So it was a very cooperative area aspect of it, but it was just different every day. So.
Any other questions?
I get to say.
I mentioned that when my opening remarks was definitely seeing the deceased body. I think another piece would be just a lot of the families that they were kind of, distraught and walking around, and then a lot of the stories that I got when I was sitting post for that is that people just kind of really pouring themselves out and stuff like that because they had just had the worst day of their whole lives, and they needed somebody to vent to, and they had no real futures. So that was probably the most devastating thing outside of actually seeing a person pass.
The worst thing I saw is by the time I got there, I said it was in December, and I'm an engineer, so I brought a couple of engineers with me. So we got a hold of a skid steer, and we just ran around just trying to clear out some buildings. By the time I was there, we were in Plaquemine Parish, so the initial effort was New Orleans and the Superdome and that kind of stuff. And so by the time we were in November or December, we had started to move out to some of those other parishes that have been largely ignored. So to the chief's point, you need to clear those bodies legally. So there were, even in December, there were still, we still had to be sensitive to that because the mortuary folks hadn't yet come and taken care of some of those folks. So, you designate that area and you keep it safe until they can come take care of it. But one just silly example is driving a skid steer into a grocery store that's had 90 days worth of spoiled food sitting in it for 90 days. And your job is to push everything out of that grocery store onto the street so that the folks that are clearing out that city can come take care of it. So you're in a skid steer in my Tyvek suit pushing 90-day-old flooded groceries out onto the street. That's nobody's idea of fun. Well, that skid steer was fun. Sir?
Well, actually, I was one of those people. I showed up and didn't know exactly what to do, and it transitioned very rapidly. I'm just trying to remember the different entities, but, churches, charitable organizations. I know we had some game and fish. We had local law enforcement, game wardens, federal forestry, and everybody was trying to play a role, but there wasn't a lot of previous interaction together. But it was just a matter of everybody trying to pull together and to pull into the same direction. One of the first things I did when we were there weren't enough commodities, and there were things that weren't thought about: diapers, baby formula, hygiene products. And I don't know how this worked, and good thing we don't have the PIFO in the room, but I do remember one of the first things that we did is I went with the brigade supply sergeant, and we went Walmart to Walmart with Hemmets and swapped our government purchase card. The limits were taken off, and filled up Hemmets full of supplies from the Fort Smith Walmarts to bring them back onto Fort Chaffee, and literally rolling around with Hemmets with HEMAT trailers. So that's an 8x8, very large truck pulling a very large trailer with soldiers standing in the back of it, handing out toilet paper, diapers, hygiene products, soap, anything you can think of, diapers. And it would be 2 a.m. and you're trying to hand out commodities, and Fort Chaffee's pretty dark at night. And, if you need baby formula, you're going to run out there and get it. But, oh, by the way, you're trying to drive this stuff around and take it to specific places, but you're handing it out as you go. And there were some civil disturbance over who got what, and that was another role that the Guard and law enforcement played, was there was some security that had to take place on Fort Chaffee as well. But all evacuees were free to go. We had a large number of evacuees that set up at the front gate because that was a good opportunity and a good place to get things donated to you.
All right, well, that question in the back?
Or any of us being been either throughout the years or even caused an actual accident to that area.
I would say no. I would say the reason I would say probably delayed my desire to go back down there. I did want to see what the development would be over time and how they were able to kind of bounce back. And you would watch things through the media, but like mentioned, some of the images and some of the things that you saw at that time were not what I experienced when I was on the ground. It's just from my point of view. But absolutely, over time, I definitely thought about that as a young person and how I wasn't sure how it would affect me over a little bit of time. But now that you mentioned it, it did take me a while before I was able to say, like, okay, I will travel down to a location like that, post seeing what it was during the height of this destruction. So.
The question was whether the experience down there was traumatic or not. And if I could just sort of turn that on its head a little bit, to echo something the chief said earlier, for a lot of us, that was the first time we had put on our uniform to do the state mission. We all understand why we enlist. We all understand the job that we're in fighting and securing our nation. But Katrina was the first time a lot of us had ever done the home mission to take care of the citizens, like was alluded to, that are desperate, that all they've got left is their dog. And I would say that was a more indelible mark for me, was, wow, I got to get back. Wow, that really was a side of my military experience as a new guardsman that I hadn't really thought through. And to see all the good that we did. Yes, there was desperation. Yes, the flooding was traumatic. And yes, that city took a long time to recover, and many of us did hard work. But that's what the Guard brings to the fight. And when you've been a part of something like that, that's actually motivated the rest of my career. I mean, I was more excited to be a guardsman after that experience than I was beforehand. I think that was the positive that I took out of it more than any lingering trauma or fears or worries.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. We appreciate your attendance. That's going to conclude our event today. And have a safe rest of the day. Thank you.